It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth, financial literacy educator and speaker, entrepreneur, and chairman of the board of a Bank Information. Take charge of your financial future with your personal bank. Now here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. And I'll tell you what, folks, today we have a lot to unpack because there's so much economic news right now that needs to be, well, folks need to know about. So I'm going to start we're just going to go. So first thing, most recent polls have shown that the number one concern Americans have now is inflation. It's actually outpaced coronavirus now, probably for the first time in a long while. And there's a lot of valid reasons for doing so. They're starting to call it Bidenflation. I think that's kind of funny if it wasn't so serious. But the latest numbers that we just have the highest increase in inflation year over year since 1990. We had an increase overall of 6.2% inflation over 1 year. So that means everything, something costs $100, today it costs $106. Some of the areas that are getting hit the most, of course, are used vehicles and food and energy prices. In fact, fuel oil, which affects the Northeast predominantly in terms of heating for the winter, and this is really scary because the Northeast particularly uses fuel oil a lot for heating, and winter is coming. The prices have increased over the last year 59%. Folks, that's a huge increase. And frankly, just about everybody expects that to be higher because as demand increases, obviously, we have a shortage of it, and supply chain issues and all those kinds of things. It's just going to really cause a significant increase in fuel oil prices, obviously. Used cars vehicles, for example, up 26% year over year and a year ago. And food, for example, is up almost 12% over the last year. That's just in 1 year. So, and just about every expert that I read or talk to or whatever, pretty much all agree that inflation is going to get worse before it gets better. So things are going to get significantly, more challenging from a financial standpoint for our country in general. All of this is, and then another article that, I'm just going to hit on real fast. Senator Joe Manchin, he's talking about the record inflation. Like he said, the inflation tax is real. He is correct. This is something that it's not transitory. This is proving all that. And that this is going everything from the grocery store to the gas pump. And Americans know the inflation tax is real, and D.C. can no longer ignore the economic pain. Well, we're going to see if they ignore it or not. But he is right. I mean, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Senator Joe Manchin, but he's right. Another thing that's really scary about all this, there's two measures, there's two indexes that are really important to understand. And so if you don't know this, there's something called, if you want to track inflation and know what's going to happen with inflation, both in the near term and moderate term going forward, there's the producer price inflation index and the consumer price index. Now, the consumer price index is basically, it's what consumers pay, okay? And that one's a more short-term, more immediate measurement of what the cost of goods and services are, or inflation, okay? We always hear about the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. But the one where you want to look at, say, if you want to know what prices are going to be, say, roughly 6 months from now, you pay it, and a lot of investors understand this, you pay attention to the Producer Price Index. Now, the Producer Price Index is basically, this shows what the prices are of producers, manufacturers, producers, etc. What are the prices that they are paying? And typically with manufacturing and production and things like that, the prices that they're paying, say, to build a car, for example, or whatever, those prices are reflected to the consumers on average about 6 months later. So again, knowing what the producer price index is can help you predict where inflation is going to be about 6 months from now. Well, here's the scary part, folks. Both are up. And that's a rare situation, okay? Typically, they're not both up, but the consumer price index, again, that was the one we were just talking about that raised 6.2% over the last 12 months, okay? That's October of 20 to October 21, just so you know. If you're listening to this at some point in the future, which, by the way, you can go to my website, yourpersonalbank.com, anytime, listen to any of the shows anytime you want. So from October 20 to October 21, we had a 6.2% increase on the average cost of goods and services. Now, things like food and stuff I stated earlier went up almost 12%, like 11.9. The CPI can be misleading because, generally speaking, the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, doesn't count things like energy costs and food, which for particularly lower income Americans are some of their biggest expenses. If the government counted those things, this is where they play those sleight of hand, those tricks on us. Again, with fuel oil being up 59% in 1 year, food being up roughly 12% in 1 year, if they counted those items, what would the Consumer Price Index be? Obviously far higher than 6.2%. In fact, the Producer Price Index is a little bit better measurement because, as I stated, this is what producers are paying for goods and services to be able to produce things that then get later passed on to the consumer. The Producer Price Index went up from September of 2020 to September 21, 8.6%. year over year. That is the highest measurement the Producer Price Index has ever recorded, and the records go back to 2010. So this is something that the Department of Labor has not counted as long, but again, is a better measurement of what inflation is going to look like about 6 months from now. So folks, without energy and without food, for the most part, inflation is up 6% over the past year. The Producer Price Index, this tells us where inflation will probably be in 6 months from now, is 8.6. That's almost a 50% increase over where we're at right now in terms of inflation. Inflation is real. We are in an inflationary situation. The prices of things are going up. I'm not saying this to be a fearmonger or to try to scare anybody. I'm laying out the facts. And these are the facts as reported by the Department of Labor. Okay? Why am I sharing this? Well, this is a financially focused show. And to put your head in the sand and be an ostrich about it is not good planning. Understanding what's going on, what's happening is, well, that's the first step in understanding on what to do. Now, how is this inflation going to affect things like the stock market, the real estate markets, precious metals, cryptocurrencies, our investments, all of it? Okay, how's it going to affect our money, right? We're going to talk about that quite a bit. Well, frankly, we're going to talk a lot about that kind of stuff today's show. So I'm just going to encourage you to stay tuned with me, okay? Some of the other things I just want to point out to folks that is just remarkable in terms of the the deafness of our leadership in Washington. But like there's an article here talking about, again, the Producer Price Index at 8.6, the Consumer Price Index at 6.2. And, if anybody's been paying any attention, you saw our department, our energy secretary, when asked if recently, what are we going to do about increasing oil production? Because, we have a shortage. We were energy independent. That's a fact a year ago. And a lot of the reason we're not is shutting down the Keystone Pipeline, that XL pipeline. That did not help at all. Stopping drilling on federal lands and all these other things that are going on. And in essence, the fear tactics our current administration has imposed on business. I mean, they don't want, if you were an energy producer, if you were a gas or oil producer, think about it a minute. Would you want to be producing energy or drilling for oil or whatever it may be in this environment, knowing that you very likely could get attacked? There's been quotes about many Democratic leaders, including Biden, saying these people have been producing should be put in jail. These are actual statements they've been making recently. These are fear tactics. These are intimidation tactics that our current government is doing to reduce the energy production. Oil, coal, gas, all of them, right? Our main sources of energy. And, they have They have a reason behind it. They want to encourage green energy and pushing that, and by subduing, coal and gas and oil and all those other traditional forms of energy that we have right now, and causing prices to increase, will force the economy, will force people into using more alternative energies, because the prices right now. Here's the bottom line: we have alternative energy sources, but most of them are not economically competitive. How's that? The technology is growing; it's getting better, no question about it. But it's not there yet in most cases. Now, there are places and areas that and that will continue to grow if you allow technology and allow the marketplace to grow and do its thing. I mean, let's face it. Look at Tesla. I mean, Tesla's become very popular in they building electric cars, and there's arguments about whether that's more environmentally friendly or not than a traditional car. But because of the sources of the metals that it takes to build the cars and the batteries and it takes and all that. But the point is, if you just let let capitalism reign, let the economic, it eventually would catch up. But they don't want to wait. They want to push this. Even to the detriment, again, Biden was asked recently, what if this causes many millions of people to lose jobs? Were you still for it? And he said, yeah, absolutely, yes. They're following a very aggressive policy of pushing energy production down to support and encourage green energy. And, of course, is creating an incredible increase in pricing. Look, when the price of fuel, the price of gas, things like that go up, that's probably one of the most fundamental things in our economy, because just about everything we consume, food and otherwise, is transported, right? It's transported on trucks and trains and ships and all that kind of stuff. And almost, the vast, vast majority of all that is fueled by gas, diesel, right? That kind of stuff. So those that are pushing aggressively for this green energy, and look, I'm not against environmentally safe energy alternatives. In fact, if I could be off the grid and have solar power and all that kind of stuff, I'd go for it. But again, it's not economically feasible in most cases yet. It will be. It will happen. But all that's going to do is cause a lot of economic pain for a lot of people. Now, one of the big solutions, like I said, I'm going to talk about this more in the next segments, is about, what is this going to do to the economy? What's this going to do to the markets and all that? There's probably going to be some very significant impacts. Inflation causes interest rates to climb. They're going to have to force them to raise interest rates. Okay, probably the Fed faster than they want to. But interest rate sensitive assets like your personal bank is a good solution for that. Contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, stay tuned in the next segment. We're going to talk about more of this, so don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. And again, we're talking about today so many of the economic news has come about recently. And this is huge news. And I was talking about the Consumer Price Index and the Producer Price Index. That's the CPI and PPI. The CPI is what consumers pay for goods and services, and the Producer Price Index is what producers pay for goods and services to create things. The CPI, 6.2%, is the highest year-over-year increase since 1990. That's significant, and that's bad enough. What's worse is the Consumer Price Index, the PPI, is up 8.6% year over year, which is the highest ever recorded since the Department of Labor has been measuring it. And why that's so important is the Producer Price Index, the PPI, is typically used to gauge what inflation is going to be about 6 months from now, because producers make things and then sell them to the consumers. And folks, businesses don't pay for inflation for the most part. It's passed on to the consumers. The biggest part of it is, or the businesses reduce expenses, many times letting people go and things like that. So fewer hours, whatever. In fact, here's another issue, a financial issue, economic issue that's important to understand. As inflation increases, wage gains are eroded. In fact, the CPI went up 6.2% over the last 12 months. Well, guess what? Wages have gone up in the last 12 months. They're actually down 2.2% since January, the average wage, and they've actually gone down 10 of the last 12 months. My point is, some people are getting paid higher because of the worker shortage. No question about that. But if at inflation increasing at 6% annually and probably higher going forward, the producer price index is pointing that way, certainly. That means if you got a 6% wage increase, for example, you didn't get an increase at all, did you? Because you're paying 6% more for everything. And typically, historically, when you see higher inflation, that's exactly what happens. Wage earners, people who are working for a living, more of their buying power is eroded because even though they might get paid more, they're paying more for the cost of goods and services. And here's the ironic part about all this. This is being caused by, energy policy and various policies that are being taken by our current government for the most part, much of it, and, worker shortages and paying people not to work and all these things that politically they're doing that are exacerbating the problem, frankly. And then vaccine mandates, which is causing, talking about a shortage of truckers. We may see up to 40% of truckers quit their jobs, quit working. What's that going to do to the cost of goods and services? It's only going to force it higher. That's the problem, and it's going to hurt average Americans. Here's another part that economically, and again, I'm not trying to throw a bunch of bad news, and I'm not trying to be a fearmonger. What I'm trying to do is educate people and help them understand that policies that our government takes impacts our economy directly. And the policies, again, of paying people to stay home, of the Federal Reserve just printing money and our federal government spending it like a drunken sailor, have an effect. It causes inflation. It causes us to have to pay more for things, goods and services. If that wasn't bad enough, wage gains that people get are often eroded because now the cost of things, it costs more to buy things. But here's another little often looked over thing. Tax brackets are based on inflation. And the IRS has now announced that the tax bracket thresholds will be rising at the fastest pace, probably, I think, ever, because of inflation. What does that mean? Many people are going to get moved into a higher tax bracket than they were before last year because of inflation. So you're paying more for things. Your dollar's worth less. It takes more dollars to chase goods and services. You might have got a raise, but it might have got wiped out by the inflation. And then you might get thrown in a higher tax bracket on top of it all by making the same amount of money. All these things have an impact, folks, on our money. Okay? So my point is the policies that our government is doing is directly impacting our money, our ability to earn money, our ability to spend money, and how much we're going to have to live on. That's why somewhere of upwards of 30% of Americans right now are concerned about inflation. Folks, it's going to get worse. And I'm sorry to say this, but it's going to get worse before it gets better. We're in a damage control situation. And to make matters worse, our Federal Reserve, although it's announced they're going to start tapering in November and stop, and that means buying bonds, which basically means they're printing $120 billion a month of money to buy bonds and mortgage-backed securities. They're backing that off, but they're going to be backing it off over the next 8 months, which means they're going to continue to exacerbate the inflation problem at least for the next 8 months. The historically low interest rate environment that the Federal Reserve has announced are going to stay and keep in place also exacerbates the inflation problem. What else does this? Well, one of the biggest inflation issues is energy costs. We were energy independent a year ago. First time we'd been energy independent in 75 years. That was an awesome accomplishment. The current administration, first day one, cut the Keystone Pipeline. Is now, as we speak right now, considering shutting down another pipeline. I've done some research on this. And I'm not an attorney, please understand. But I fail to understand why the executive branch of our government has the legal authority to shut down economic endeavors like pipelines, private enterprise. I don't get it. And there are a lot of constitutional scholars and stuff that it turns out that agree with me. There's some very intelligent legal scholars who are saying they don't have the unilateral right. The president doesn't have the unilateral right to shut down the Keystone Pipeline, for example, or any other pipeline for that matter. Yet they're doing it anyway. And that's what's so infuriating. The actions are directly impacting our money. It's creating inflation and increasing inflation, and just they're piling on and piling on. And this is going to make it worse and worse. And frankly, they probably don't have the legal right to do it, but they're doing it anyway. What can we do? Well, folks, short term, we're in damage control. Protect our money the best we can. Understand that as inflation increases, so does the risk of the stock market, for example. Understand that, well, a lot of people talk about real estate. Well, real estate prices have surged 18% nationally over the last year, but just about every expert says that's going to dramatically slow down next year. So the increase of real estate is probably not going to be and it's gone up so much, unaffordable for a lot of people. They talk about precious metals, but if you go look at the charts, April of 2020, we had a 30% reduction in the stock markets with the COVID shutdowns of the economies. Yet gold didn't move, didn't go up. You would think it would. Basically what happened is the world banks manipulated the price because they didn't want the price to go up. Some people talk about cryptocurrency, but I'm going to discuss that in the next segment because I'm coming into a hard break here of being in an inflation protector. But there's some really, really valid concerns I'm going to share with you. In fact, from one of the top Bitcoin investors who happens to be one of my clients. So I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment because I'm going to talk about that and a few other things and what you can do to protect yourself. So stay tuned.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to Your Personal Bank. And we have been discussing, the latest inflation numbers. Consumer Price Index, 6.2%, highest since 1990, year-by-year increase. The Producer Price Index, 8.6% year-over-year increase, the highest ever recorded. And again, the Producer Price Index is a better measure of what inflation is going to be looking like in about 6 months from now. So every indication shows us that as bad as inflation is already, some of the highest we've seen since the 70s, frankly, is going to get worse before it gets better. That's why your experts are saying that and why more and more people are getting concerned about it, as they rightly should be. But what's exacerbating all this is our government insists on continuing to spend money, even though you have senators even Democratic senators like Joe Manchin saying, hey, we can't be spending all this money, although he voted for the infrastructure package, to spend more money because of inflation. They basically passed this $1.2 trillion infrastructure package, right? And, on the surface, it sounds all right. They're going to spend money on roads and bridges and it's going to help the economy and all this kind of stuff. Well, is it? What's in this thing? Well, actually, out of the $1.2 trillion, about 10% of it, $1.1 billion, is actually going to roads and bridges. So go figure. Our federal government tells us one thing, yet does something else. Does that surprise anybody still? I mean, that's the sad part about all this. There's other things, what they call infrastructure, but I'll give you an example of some things. One of the things the infrastructure bill is going to do is it's going to punish people for driving their own car. And what do you mean by that? Well, it includes a congestion relief program, which encourages cities and cities to charge cars for traveling into city limits during peak hours. If you go into California, drive in L.A., you see there's like fast track lanes or whatever you call it. And I know some other big cities have it, but LA is really famous for this, where you pay a fee so you can go in this lane and you get charged for it. This bill is basically encouraging cities to establish this. I don't know if they're going to do it nationally or what, but basically prevent you from driving in, or you have to pay extra if you want to drive into a city during peak hours. Yeah, isn't that lovely? Public transportation, a bunch of money's going to transportation. A lot of it to Amtrak, which is a government-supported, failed rail system. But Joe Biden likes it, so, go figure, right? Climate policy, this is interesting. A bunch of money's going to dictate states' carbon reduction policies from Washington to develop carbon reduction strategies. Now, what's all that going to be? What you're doing is you're either creating new bureaucracies or empowering bureaucracies that exist to do more and to hire more people and spend more money and basically regulate us more. Just what we need, right? Bunch of money, like I said, going to electric chargers for e-vehicles like the private industry, Tesla and them. They can't do that themselves. Interesting. Here's another one. The word equity is in the bill 70 times. And one of the most ridiculous ones is where they call environmental justice, what they call tree justice. They're setting aside money for conducting equity assessment by mapping tree canopy gaps, flood-prone locations, and urban heat island hotspots. Look, I live in Phoenix. I know what that's all about. And I've often said, why don't we plant more trees? But do we need to spend money for that right now federally when we have $28 trillion of debt? I think it could be done much more efficiently on a local level rather than a federal level. A bunch of money is going to improving broadband access and internet. Oh, by the way, internet training for prisoners too. Now, I wonder if the social media companies had anything to do with this, because something like $65 billion, I believe, is going of this plan is going to expanding internet. And by the way, it establishes a permanent subsidy for people making up to 135% of the poverty level to access the internet. So basically, the taxpayers, are going to pay for poor people to have internet access. Boy, that's really important, isn't it? Gosh, you just got to have internet access. I mean, that's if you're poor and you're a low-income person, that's the number one thing you need, right? Yeah, $65 billion. I wonder who had anything to do with that. How's it paid for? Well, what they're doing is some of the COVID money that they passed earlier in the year that wasn't spent. And by the way, a lot of it comes from the states who shut down the federal enhancement unemployment benefits early because they wanted people to go back to work because they couldn't find people to work. Many of the more liberal Democratic states didn't. They're going to use that money. So the states that were more responsible, more fiscally responsible with their money, are going to help pay for this. But it's still, they're estimating it's still going to add something like $250 billion to our debt. And they spent $1.2 trillion overall, and about 10% of it goes to roads and bridges. Yeah, that's an infrastructure deal, and that's something we really, really needed as a country right now, especially when most roads and bridges are actually handled by the states. Stay tuned in the next segment. I'm going to talk about both the short and the long-term solution to all this, and of course, what we can do to help facilitate this and weather this storm. Okay? So don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. If you can't tell, I'm beyond frustrated. I'm a fiscally responsible person. I teach fiscal responsibility. I see the devastation that people's lives, when they have economic crisis, our government leaders, and I'm talking about pretty much all the Democrats, and unfortunately some of the Republicans, particularly the ones that voted for this infrastructure bill, this $1.2 trillion, are, in my opinion, completely and totally fiscally irresponsible and do not understand the risk and threat to our country right now. And here's what I mean by this. Look, I'm not against repairing or enhancing roads and bridges. If this was all about roads and bridges, I'd have less of an issue with it. But frankly, states have largely have the responsibility for that. They spend something like $300 billion a year, roughly, on roads and bridges. The federal government takes care of dams and things like that. They don't really take care of roads and bridges. The $1.2 trillion that was passed recently, only 110 billion, about 10% of it went to roads and bridges. The rest of it goes to a lot of other stuff that they call infrastructure, but most normal, reasonable people wouldn't. And on top of it all, what really infuriating to me is I expected the Democrats to vote for this, but we had 19 Republican senators and Congress people vote for this infrastructure package, mostly more moderate or liberal Republicans, rhinos, many people call them, Republican in name only. They're certainly not fiscally responsible, and that's including the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who voted for this. Those people who voted for this should be remembered, primaried, and voted out of office. And here's why. We're $28 trillion in debt. Now, that's a number that's absolutely, completely, and totally unfathomable to just about any person. But if you want to break that down, you're talking about several $100,000 of debt for every single man, woman, and child living in this country today. I don't know the exact numbers. I've seen different studies on this, but it could easily, for a family of four, easily add up to $1 million of debt per family. What would your financial position look like if you had $1 million of debt? It wouldn't be good. Now, fortunately, at this point, our federal government brings in more than the interest payments, and it's able to pay its bills, but it keeps spending more than it brings in. It keeps borrowing more, and this train has not only stopped, but it's accelerated dramatically. In fact, in over every single administration for the last several decades. What needs to happen is what we saw in Virginia and New Jersey and various other parts of the country recently with the recent elections, where the American people woke up and said, no, enough's enough. And not just the conservatives, but also the moderates, the independents, the moderate Democrats. Fiscal responsibility cuts across all ethnic, age, political, you name it, cuts across all swaths. Responsible people understand fiscal responsibility. And it needs to be an important key to who you vote for and who you support in the future. I'm going to be doing some things where we'll be bringing on some guests. We're doing some vetting as we speak in terms of certain nominees for different offices. I'm going to invite some of those who, after we've vetted them, and I feel like their goals, their policies more or less line up to what's important, what I think is important at least. I think with most people I deal with, fiscal responsibility clearly is going to be one of them. Protecting our freedoms of citizens is certainly going to be a very important factor. But if I take, as bad as many of the Democrats were in terms of voting for this, and God forbid if they vote for another, they're talking about voting for another package to spend more, which I understand that's their goal. What people need to understand is that in these, right now, 30% of Americans, roughly, all Americans, are number one concern is inflation. And that's going to increase as prices continue to get higher and people get paying more and more for gas at the pump and all this, more and more for food and more for heating oil or anything else for that matter. The thing that we need to understand is recent polls have also shown that only 16% of Americans are what you would consider, what they call themselves, progressive. I call them regressives. Yet the current administration is blindly following their agenda. Biden ran as a moderate. People voted for him because they wanted normalcy. Folks, there's nothing normal about this administration. The nominees that they are putting up, I talked about the nominee of Comptroller Currency. She got her degree in Moscow. She has called for the dissolution of banks as we know it, wants everyone to bank directly with the Federal Reserve, and wants oil and gas industries, recently she stated, wanted oil and gas industries to go bankrupt so we could fight climate change. That's who a person who's very important in the Department of Treasury has been nominated by the Biden administration. The recent FCC person has been nominated to head that up, has called openly for revoking the licenses of conservative shows. That's who they want to put in charge. And again, the most radical leftists, Marxists, are running the show right now, are getting nominated into these positions of power and are in power. And they keep moving forward, all guns a-blazing, so to speak, all the gusto they can, because I believe they're not foolish. They understand they got a rare opportunity. COVID opened the door for them to get in power and get in power of a leader who did a complete 180. Even AOC stated she was surprised by how progressive, how liberal Biden was. She was expecting something far more conservative. I don't have any proof of this. I'm just looking at the evidence. I believe that those in power, when they saw that Bernie Sanders was clearly was on his way to winning the Democratic nomination, and what was funny, what's ironic, he's not even a Democrat, he's an independent, and he's an avowed communist and is open about it. You know, I don't have a big issue with Bernie, frankly. He stands up for what he believes in. He doesn't mislead people. I don't have any problem with that. I don't agree with him at all. And understand this Build Back Better bill that they've been arguing with forever, and who knows if it'll pass or not, and it's been shaved and all this. You know who wrote that bill? Bernie Sanders. He's the author. A communist. And openly admitted himself. I'm not saying it. He said it. He said it multiple times. He's a communist. And he's the one that wrote the bill. And we want to pass something like that in our country? Does that even make any sense? See, that's how far towards Marxism our current administration has gone. What's the solution? I've said this over and over again. We're in damage control, folks. These nominees, contact your congressperson, your senators, all that. Tell them to the FCC and the Comptroller of the Currency nominees. Look it up. Research it. These are openly avowed anti-American communist, I'm not saying this lightly, communist sympathizers who they want to put in charge of vast swaths of our government. Tell them no. Vote no on these nominations. Now, I think, again, this is my opinion, I think whoever is actually in charge of the Biden administration, I don't think it's one person. I think it's a committee of hard leftists, Marxists, who recognize that they're probably going to lose power in a year, so they got to go for it. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do what they can do. We have to be in damage control and fight every step of the way we can to protect our freedoms. Look, I even had somebody complain because I was talking too much about protecting our freedoms. Folks, I don't think I talk about it enough. And I don't think enough people a majority have woken up, thankfully. A lot of people have. But we got to fight. We're going to have to fight more. I hate to say it. It's frustrating, but we're going to have to. And understand, if you've been a lifelong Democrat, even Ronald Reagan said it. He didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left him. The Democratic Party is being run right now by 16% of the country, progressives who are basically, they're really Marxists, hard left Marxists that have taken control of. They're the most aggressive and active political actors. And they've taken control of the Democratic Party, and the party's allowed them to do it. Look, if you've voted Democrat your whole life, you've got to really seriously reconsider. Because even if you like the particular candidate, you've got to understand they've allowed this to happen. They've allowed our country to be ruled or ran by Marxists, by folks who want to take control of this country and your life and every aspect of it, just like Russia. Or China's their model, folks. That's the facts. They love China. China's model. Authoritarianism. That's the model. There'll still be some capitalism, but only if you're in their good graces. Look at China. Okay? Get involved. Find a candidate that you like. Support them. Volunteer. Get the people out. Knock doors. Do whatever you can do. Donate. Or run yourself. I love this truck driver in New Jersey who ran because, folks, if you didn't hear about that story, look it up. His name's Durr, D-U-R-R. And he unseated the second most powerful Democrat politician in the state of New Jersey. He was the senator of the state Senate for the last decade plus. And he overseated him, barely spent any money because he got fed up. And you know why he ran? Because he couldn't get a concealed carry permit. He was told by a sheriff, don't even bother. Okay? He felt like that was an infringement on his rights, and he is correct. It's an infringement on the Second Amendment. Man, he did the most American thing possible. He didn't just complain about it, he did something about it. And that is uniquely and truly and completely American. That's the type of attitude and the type of action and the type of things that we need to do as individuals. Find your place. I've been being called the town crier. And you know what? I'm going to wear that as a badge of honor. Because if I can wake up, and I know I've done this, I'm getting dozens and dozens of positive responses every show. Thank you for the support and encouragement. And people saying, look, keep going, keep encouraging us, keep challenging people, keep educating them. Look, contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 if you know somebody that you think we should be supporting, or yourpersonalbank.com. If you want to take control of your money and reduce your taxes and reduce your bank footprint and all these kinds of things to protect your money, contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's how I make my living. And and I'll help put you in a better financial position and get you positive arbitrage, help you make more money and pay less taxes and protect your money from all this uncertainty and from higher taxation most likely coming and all these things. Okay? So again, contact me. And the other thing I'm going to ask for help on, I don't normally like do this very often. I'm terrible at it, but we want to expand the show to other cities. I've been told by multiple people we need to expand this. We're ready for syndication. I need sponsors. I need somebody that'll sponsor me or several sponsors that'll take us to other cities and other markets so that I can share this message and expand it further. So again, if you know somebody that might be a great sponsor, contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guest on this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Products and riders may have limitations and may not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Compare when considering a replacement. Dividend rates and baseline of credit rates may change. Contact yourpersonalbank.com for current rates.